Well, for tonight's thought experiment, let's begin with consideration of the question of where would Nicolas Maduro be tonight if he was a drug trafficking, murdering, torturing dictator who hated Cuba and never supplied oil to Cuba. Marco Rubio wants you to believe that it's about this. It's all about this. Marco Rubio says that this 25-page indictment is the reason the United States of America invaded Venezuela and captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Most of the pages of the 25-page indictment do not attempt to describe crimes committed by Maduro or his wife. The indictment alleges that Maduro and his wife participated in a drug trafficking conspiracy. The only specifics offered about any criminal action involving Nicolas Maduro or his wife refer only to one meeting that his wife attended in 2007, 6 years before she married Maduro and long before Maduro became president of Venezuela. And according to the indictment, in that meeting, Maduro's future wife, quote, accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to broker a meeting between a large-scale drug trafficker and the director of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office. That's it. No specifics about that. No indication of how they know that. And no meetings actually involving Nicolas Maduro are described in the indictment. This is as vague an indictment as you could imagine. But this is why Marco Rubio and Donald Trump launched their one-day war with Venezuela, according to Marco Rubio. The drug trafficking conspiracy described on page 9 of this indictment says the transshipment points in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico similarly relied on a culture of corruption in which cocaine traffickers operating in those countries paid a portion of their own profits to politicians who protected them and aided them. And last month, Donald Trump pardoned one of the politicians described in that sentence on page 9 of this new indictment, the former president of Honduras. A politician referred to in this Trump Justice Department indictment was pardoned by Donald Trump last month, pardoned for drug trafficking scheme that is mentioned in the new indictment. Donald Trump already pardoned the Honduras guy. Donald Trump said this weekend that he pardoned the convicted drug trafficking president of Honduras because that former president of Honduras was prosecuted while Joe Biden was president of the United States. So any indictments of any drug traffickers during the Biden years are illegitimate, according to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's Justice Department rewrote that indictment, wrote a new indictment for Marco Rubio to stand behind, claiming that he did not wage war on Venezuela. He was simply using the military to enforce an arrest warrant for the Department of Justice. We'll have a more detailed discussion of the Maduro indictment later in this hour when Andrew Weissman joins us. Since Donald Trump's last consideration of a Latin American president accused of and convicted of drug trafficking was to pardon him, there is absolutely no reason to believe that the indictment is why the United States invaded Venezuela. What Marco Rubio did in Venezuela after spending most of the last year, we now know, secretly masterminding the invasion of Venezuela and the capture of Nicolas Maduro was the closest Marco Rubio could come right now to delivering on the dream that will never die. It is the dream of some Cuban Americans like Marco Rubio and other right-wing extremists in the United States, the dream many of them have held since April of 1961, when a similarly planned invasion of Cuba failed at the Bay of Pigs. 87 days into John F. Kennedy's presidency, the CIA executed a long-planned invasion of Cuba, a plan that began before the Kennedy presidency. The invasion was at the Bay of Pigs, and it was defeated by Fidel Castro, who personally commanded the Cuban Defense Forces at the point of battle. It was a full humiliation for the CIA and the American military and for President Kennedy, who considered it the worst mistake of his presidency, which it most certainly was. It was a stain on American foreign policy that Americans forgot, but the world did not, especially Latin America. This is the way it was supposed to go. The Bay of Pigs was supposed to go the way Marco Rubio and the team executed the plan in Venezuela. Donald Trump can be presumed to be lying about every reason he gives for everything he does, having been documented by the Washington Post for pathologically telling over 30,000 lies during his first term as president. Everyone who can think has known from the start that Donald Trump's missile attacks on small boats with outboard motors off the coast of Venezuela were not about stopping drug trafficking. None of those boats could have reached the United States. They are all too small and don't carry enough fuel and could only reach the closest island, where they could have easily been intercepted. And now many observers feel vindicated in the belief that it was never about the drugs in those missile strikes, because Donald Trump has now said it's about the oil. But what if he's lying again? What if it is not about the oil? What if it is about Marco Rubio's dream? What if it's about Cuba?
Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about, because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation. And we want to help the people of. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I mean, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously. Suffice it to say, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, they were, all of the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba, that tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
A little bit. Marco Rubio doesn't really care about Venezuela. Marco Rubio cares that Venezuela has provided oil for Cuba. Marco Rubio wants to starve Cuba of oil and all other resources. That has been the failed purpose of the American embargo on Cuba for our entire lifetimes. Donald Trump may understand none of this, or he might understand a little bit of it. But it doesn't seem impossible for Marco Rubio to convince Donald Trump of the glorious place in history for him if he becomes the American president who finally liberates Cuba from dictatorship, finally fulfills the dream that will never die. If starving Cuba of resources does not work, we have now seen the dress rehearsal for an invasion of Cuba aimed at regime change. If that happens, when a reporter asks who will be running Cuba, there would be no disagreement between Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio would proudly announce that he is running Cuba if he gets that chance. If Cuba is the real target, it serves Donald Trump's fog of confusion style to throw in threats to Colombia and Greenland and any other place he can think of while he's at it. There will never be a move of any kind against Greenland. Greenland is nothing but a Trump device for distraction, and it works. You will be able to find television discussions of, will they send troops to Greenland? Every second of that is nonsense, and every second of that is a successful Trumpian distraction from what they are really doing. President Kennedy was in the grip of very bad advice when he agreed to launch the Bay of Pigs invasion, an invasion that had been planned. The beginning of the planning occurred under President Eisenhower, the Republican president who preceded President Kennedy. American presidential politics has been in the grip of the Cuban-American dream of overthrowing dictatorship in Cuba ever since. And because Cuban Americans are concentrated in the important electoral college state of Florida, the United States of America has been politically, in effect, prevented through the mathematics of presidential politics from normalizing relations with the harmless little country 90 miles from Florida. Republicans in particular have spent the last 65 years lying about how threatening to the United States and the world the tiny country of Cuba is. And now Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have shown how easy it is to lie to a very supportive Republican Party and presumably Republican voters about what a threat to the national security of the United States Venezuela is. No one had ever heard that before, but they have succeeded on their side of our politics with that lie. Donald Trump believes the American military is his plaything, but the law and the Constitution says otherwise. The power to initiate war lies exclusively with Congress, and the power to initiate emergency military action for national defense rests with the president, but since 1973 requires the president to follow a formal notification process with Congress. That is the law. That law was violated by Marco Rubio willfully and Donald Trump willfully in their invasion of Venezuela. But today, Marco Rubio explained it all to our first guest tonight.